Witness the moment when heaven touches earth and divine words are inscribed in stone. This is the story of how God delivered his eternal laws to Moses atop Mount Sinai. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Exodus 20:1-2. The sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The camp of the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai began to awaken. The aroma of fresh bread and the sound of sleepy voices filled the air. Moses, the leader chosen by God, stepped out of his tent, his eyes fixed on the imposing peak rising before him. He knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. As he walked among the people, Moses could feel the anticipation growing. 3 days ago, he had instructed everyone to purify themselves and prepare for an encounter with God. The people washed their clothes, fasted and prayed, eager for what was to come. The buzz of conversations filled the air, everyone speculating about what God might reveal. Suddenly, a deafening thunder broke the morning silence. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a dense, dark cloud descended upon the mountain's peak. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the camp with brilliant flashes. Children ran to their parents' arms, frightened by the celestial spectacle unfolding before them. Moses gathered the elders and leaders of the tribes. With a firm voice, he reminded them of God's instructions. No one should touch the mountain or come too close. The divine presence was sacred and dangerous for those who were not prepared. The leaders nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. They dispersed to convey the message to the rest of the people. The sound of a heavenly trumpet echoed through the valley, increasing in volume and intensity with each moment. Moses' heart raced as he recognized the divine call. He knew it was time to ascend the mountain. With determined steps, he began his journey toward the cloud-enshrouded peak, leaving behind a sea of anxious and awestruck faces. As Moses climbed, the air grew thinner, and the temperature dropped. Thick smoke enveloped the mountain like a shroud, obscuring his vision. Still, he continued, guided by an inner force that propelled him forward. Each step brought him closer to an encounter that would change not only his life but the course of human history. The ground beneath his feet shifted from sand and stones to solid rock. Moses could feel the energy pulsing through the mountain, as if all of creation was alive and aware of the Creator's presence. The air hummed with an invisible electricity, making the hair on his arms stand on end. He paused for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what was about to happen. Suddenly, the voice of God thundered from within the cloud, more powerful than 1,000 storms and yet softer than a whisper. "Moses," the voice called, reverberating through his being. With his heart pounding, Moses responded, "Here I am, Lord." He knew he was about to receive something of immense value for his people. God began to speak, his words laden with authority and love. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery," he declared. Moses trembled at the majesty of these words, understanding that he was about to receive commandments that would shape the life and faith of his people for generations. As God continued to speak, Moses felt each word being etched not only on the stone tablets, but also in his own heart. The 10 Commandments, fundamental principles for a life in harmony with God and fellow humans, were revealed one by one. Moses listened intently, aware of the weight of the responsibility he was receiving. The first commandment echoed clearly, "You shall have no other gods before me." Moses immediately grasped the significance of this declaration. After centuries of slavery in Egypt, where multiple gods were worshipped, his people needed to understand the supremacy and uniqueness of the true God. This commandment would be the foundation of their faith and identity as a nation. Next came the prohibition against making carved images or any likeness of anything in heaven, on earth, or in the waters. Moses reflected on how this would protect the people from falling into idolatry, keeping their worship pure and focused on the invisible, all-powerful God who had liberated them. He knew it would be a challenge for a people accustomed to visual representations of deities. The third commandment warned against the misuse of God's name. Moses understood the seriousness of treating the divine name with reverence, recognizing the power and holiness it carried. This commandment would teach the people the importance of honoring God, not only in actions, but also in words. When God proclaimed the fourth commandment about keeping the Sabbath day holy, Moses saw the wisdom behind it. A day of rest was not just a break from labor, but a sacred time to renew their relationship with God and with one another. It would be a weekly reminder of creation and their liberation from Egypt. The fifth commandment, to honor one's father and mother, touched Moses deeply. He thought of his own parents and how this commandment would strengthen families and, by extension, the entire community. Respect for elders and the value of wisdom passed down through generations would be fundamental for the society they were building. The voice of God continued to resonate, and Moses remained in reverent attention. The sixth commandment echoed through the mountain, "You shall not kill." The simplicity and power of these words struck Moses like lightning. He immediately understood the sacred value God placed on human life. This commandment would lay the foundation for a just and peaceful society, where each individual would be respected as a divine creation. As he reflected on the impact of this commandment, Moses thought about the years of slavery in Egypt, where the lives of the Israelites were often devalued. Now, with this divine law, his people would learn to treat each life as precious, breaking the cycle of violence that had surrounded them for so long. He imagined a future where disputes would be resolved with words, not weapons. The seventh commandment followed, "You shall not commit adultery." Moses understood that this law went beyond marital fidelity. It was a call to integrity in all relationships. He saw how this would strengthen family bonds, creating a solid foundation for the community. Mutual trust and respect would be cultivated, allowing true love to flourish among couples and extend to the whole society. Moses thought about how this commandment would protect the most vulnerable, especially children, ensuring them a stable and loving home. He envisioned united families supporting each other, and a nation built on the rock of fidelity and commitment. This commandment would be a beacon of hope in a world often dominated by lust and selfishness. "You shall not steal," proclaimed God, and Moses felt the weight of the eighth commandment. He reflected on how theft corroded trust between people and destroyed the social fabric. This commandment would teach the people the value of honest work and respect for others' property. Moses visualized a society where people would feel secure, knowing their belongings and their work would be respected. He thought about the years of slavery, when everything was taken from them, and how this commandment would restore his people's dignity. Each person would have the right to enjoy the fruits of their labor, creating an economy based on justice and fairness. Moses saw that this would encourage voluntary generosity, as people would learn to share by choice, not coercion. The ninth commandment resonated clearly, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Moses immediately understood how this law would be crucial for maintaining justice and harmony in the community. Truth would be the foundation upon which all social interactions were based. He envisioned fair courts, where honest testimonies would ensure that innocence was protected and guilt properly identified. More than that, Moses realized that this commandment extended to all forms of communication. Gossip, slander, and lies would be discouraged, promoting an environment of mutual trust. He saw a future where words would be used to build up, not tear down, where each person's reputation would be valued and protected. Finally, the 10th commandment was pronounced, "You shall not covet." Moses was struck by the depth of this law. Unlike the other commandments that dealt with external actions, this one focused on the human heart. He understood that covetousness was the root of many evils, leading people to violate the other commandments. This final precept would be the key to genuine, heartfelt obedience. Moses reflected on how covetousness could corrode the soul of a person and an entire nation. He saw that contentment and gratitude would be essential virtues for his people. This commandment would teach them to appreciate what they had, rather than always desiring what belonged to others. It would be a call to find satisfaction in God, not in material possessions. As the divine voice fell silent, Moses remained still, absorbing the magnitude of what he had just received. He looked at the stone tablets in his hands, where the 10 Commandments were now inscribed by the very finger of God. Each word seemed to shine with an inner light, a tangible reminder of the divine presence and will. The ensuing silence was deafening. Moses felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that these commandments were not mere rules, but a path to life, a guide to a right relationship with God and with others. His mind spun with the implications of each law and how they would transform his people. Slowly, Moses began to descend the mountain, the tablets carefully held against his chest. Each step was deliberate, as if he were carrying the very future of Israel. He thought about how he would present these laws to the people, how he would explain them so that everyone could understand their importance and beauty. As he approached the camp, Moses could hear the growing murmur of the crowd. They eagerly awaited his return, curious to know what God had revealed. He took a deep breath, preparing for the moment when he would share these divine laws with his people, knowing this would be a turning point in their history. Moses' heart was filled with hope and fear. Hope for the bright future these commandments promised, a future of justice, love, and fidelity to God. But he also feared the responsibility of leading the people on this new path, knowing that human nature often resisted change and obedience. As he emerged from the cloud that enveloped the mountain, Moses saw thousands of faces turned towards him, waiting expectantly. He knew that the words he would speak next would shape the destiny of generations. With one last breath of preparation, he raised the tablets for all to see, ready to reveal God's law and usher in a new era for the people of Israel. Moses raised his voice, which echoed throughout the silent camp. "People of Israel," he began, "listen to the words that the Lord our God has given us." A shiver ran through the crowd. All eyes were fixed on the stone tablets Moses held. The leader began to recite the commandments, his voice filled with emotion and reverence. As each commandment was pronounced, waves of reaction swept through the people. Some nodded in approval, others seemed perplexed, and still others showed signs of discomfort. Moses watched closely, aware that these laws would challenge many of the habits and beliefs the people had acquired during their years of slavery in Egypt. When Moses finished reading, a deep silence fell over the camp. It was as if each person was processing the weight and significance of what they had just heard. Then, slowly, voices began to rise. Questions, comments, and exclamations of admiration filled the air. Moses knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey of understanding and acceptance. Joshua, Moses' young assistant, approached with a look of concern. "Moses," he whispered, "some are questioning whether they will be able to keep all these laws. They fear God's punishment if they fail." Moses nodded understandingly. He knew that fear was not the path to true obedience, and that he needed to help the people understand the heart behind the commandments. With a gesture, Moses called for silence among the crowd. "My brothers and sisters," he said with a gentle but firm voice, "these laws are not a burden, but a gift. They are the path to true freedom, to live in harmony with each other and with our God. Do not fear, for the Lord has given us these laws out of love, to guide and protect us." Moses' words seemed to calm many anxious hearts. He saw faces soften and tense shoulders relax, but he knew that words alone would not be enough. It would take time, patience, and example for the people to truly embrace these new principles of life. In the days that followed, Moses worked tirelessly to explain and interpret the commandments. He gathered the elders and leaders of the tribes, discussing how to apply these laws in the daily life of the people. Heated debates often arose as everyone struggled to understand the practical implications of each commandment. One afternoon, as Moses walked through the camp, he noticed a subtle change in the air. Small acts of kindness and consideration seemed more frequent. Disputes that would have previously escalated into violent conflicts were now resolved with words. He saw families gathered, parents teaching the commandments to their children with pride and reverence. However, not everything was perfect. Moses also witnessed moments of weakness and disobedience. He saw people struggling with old habits, falling and getting up again. But instead of discouragement, he felt hope. Every effort to live according to the commandments, even when imperfect, was a step toward becoming the nation God had called them to be. One evening, as he watched the sun set over the camp, Aaron, Moses' brother, joined him. "Do you think we will succeed, brother?" Aaron asked, his voice a mix of doubt and hope. Moses was silent for a moment, pondering the question. Finally, he replied, "With God's help, yes. It will not be easy. But every day we live according to His law brings us closer to the people we are meant to be." As the weeks passed, Moses observed a gradual transformation in the camp. The Sabbath day, once just another day, was now observed with joy and reverence. Families gathered to rest and worship, strengthening bonds and renewing their faith. It was a living testimony to the transformative power of the commandments. Respect for parents and the elderly was visibly growing. Moses noticed young people seeking advice from the elders, honoring their wisdom and experience. This simple act was strengthening the social structure of the community, creating a sense of continuity and tradition that would be vital for their future as a nation. One day, Moses was called to mediate a dispute between two men. To his surprise and joy, before he could speak, one of the men turned to the other and said, "Brother, forgive me. I spoke against you without reason, violating the commandment not to bear false witness." The other man, moved by this confession, immediately offered his forgiveness. Moses felt his heart fill with gratitude as he saw the commandments shaping not just actions, but hearts. However, not everyone embraced the new laws with the same enthusiasm. Moses faced constant challenges from some who saw the commandments as restrictions on their freedom. With patience and wisdom, he reminded them of the slavery they had left behind and how these laws were actually the path to true freedom. Freedom from fear, injustice, and moral chaos. One morning, Moses was awakened by sounds of argument. Rushing to the center of the camp, he found a group gathered around a man who had been caught stealing. Some were calling for severe punishment, citing the commandment against theft. Moses raised his hands, calling for silence. Calmly, he reminded everyone that the commandments were not just about punishment, but about restoration and justice. Under Moses' guidance, the community worked together to understand the reasons behind the theft and find a solution that honored both the law and the dignity of the individual. This incident became a living lesson on the compassionate application of God's law, showing that justice and mercy could and should go hand in hand. As time passed, Moses saw the impact of the 10 Commandments extending beyond individual behavior, shaping the very structure of Israelite society. Courts were established with judges committed to truth and justice. Commerce flourished, based on principles of honesty and mutual respect. Worshipping God became the center of community life, uniting the people in purpose and identity. Months had passed since the delivery of the 10 Commandments, and the Israelite camp at the foot of Mount Sinai had transformed. What had once been a disorganized multitude of former slaves now began to resemble a cohesive nation, united by common laws and purpose. Moses, observing this transformation, felt a mixture of pride and humility, knowing it was the work of God through the commandments. One afternoon, while walking through the camp, Moses noticed a group of children playing. They had created a game based on the 10 Commandments, competing to see who could recite them the fastest and most accurately. Moses smiled, realizing how the divine laws were being absorbed by the new generation, not as a burden but as a natural and joyful part of their lives. However, not all challenges had disappeared. Moses was approached by a young couple, distressed and confused. "Moses," said the husband, "we love each other, but sometimes we feel desire for other people. Are we breaking the commandment against adultery just by having these thoughts?" Moses saw this question as an opportunity to deepen the people's understanding of the nature of the commandments. Gently, Moses explained that the commandments were not only about external actions but also about the heart. Desire may arise, he said, but it is our choice to either nurture it or dismiss it that matters. God gave us these commandments not to condemn us but to guide us toward healthy and faithful relationships. The couple left comforted, with a new understanding of the depth and purpose of the divine laws. As the understanding of the commandments deepened, Moses noticed subtle but significant changes in the community. Disputes that previously would have led to violence were now resolved through dialogue and mediation. Respect for others' property grew, resulting in fewer cases of theft and a general atmosphere of trust and security. One day, Moses was surprised by a group of artisans who had gathered to discuss the second commandment, which prohibited the creation of carved images. How can we express our creativity and worship God without violating this commandment, they asked. Moses reflected on the question, recognizing the tension between the prohibition of idolatry and the human desire to create beauty. After praying for wisdom, Moses responded, "The commandment does not forbid all forms of art but warns us against idolatry. Use your gifts to create beauty that glorifies God, but without making images that could become objects of worship." This interpretation paved the way for an explosion of creativity in the camp, with artisans producing beautiful works in fabric, wood, and metal, all inspired by the glory of God, without falling into the trap of idolatry. The observance of the Sabbath became a central aspect of community life. Moses watched with satisfaction as this weekly day of rest revitalized the people, not just physically but spiritually. Families spent time together, strengthening bonds. The community gathered for worship and study of God's laws. It was a regular reminder of divine care and Israel's unique identity as the chosen people. However, the challenge of constant obedience remained. Moses was confronted with cases of people who, in moments of stress or temptation, violated the commandments. With wisdom, he established a system of repentance and restoration, teaching that the way back to God was always open for the truly repentant. This approach of merciful justice further strengthened the faith and cohesion of the community. One particularly notable incident occurred when a man was caught using God's name in vain, violating the third commandment. Instead of simply punishing him, Moses saw an opportunity for teaching. He gathered the people and explained the importance of honoring God's name, not out of fear, but out of reverence and love. When we use God's name with respect, Moses taught, we acknowledge His holiness and remind ourselves of who we are called to be. As the understanding of the commandments deepened, Moses noticed a change in the people's language. Casual oaths and blasphemies once common became rare. People began to use words more carefully and thoughtfully, reflecting a growing respect not only for God but also for one another. The impact of the fifth commandment, honoring father and mother, extended beyond individual families, shaping the very social structure. Moses observed with approval how respect for the elderly grew, their wisdom being valued and sought after. This respect for authority and experience strengthened community leadership and promoted a smooth transmission of knowledge and traditions between generations. While reflecting on these changes, Moses was approached by a group of young people. They expressed their gratitude for the commandments but also their struggle to live up to them. "How can we be perfect?" they asked. Moses smiled gently, recognizing in this question the sincere desire to please God. "Children," Moses replied, "the commandments are not a test of perfection but a path for growth. Every effort to live according to these laws brings us closer to God and to each other. The important thing is not perfection, but the sincere desire to obey and the humility to acknowledge when we fail." His words brought comfort and new determination to the young people, who left with a deeper understanding of the commandment's purpose. As time passed, Moses saw the impact of the 10 Commandments extending beyond individual behavior, shaping the collective identity of Israel. The people began to see themselves not just as a group of former slaves, but as a holy nation, called to a divine purpose. This new identity brought with it a sense of responsibility and mission that Moses knew would be crucial for the challenges that lay ahead. The time in the Sinai desert was coming to an end. Moses knew that soon the people would depart for the Promised Land, carrying with them the tablets of the 10 Commandments and, more importantly, the lessons learned during this crucial period. He called all the people to a final assembly, determined to reinforce the eternal importance of these divine principles. At dawn, the crowd gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai. The air was filled with expectation. Moses climbed onto a raised platform, the tablets of the commandments in his hands. His gaze swept across the faces of the people, faces that had changed so much since that first day the commandments were given. He saw strength where there had been fear, purpose where there had been confusion. "People of Israel," Moses began, his voice resonating through the camp, "today we prepare to leave this sacred place, but we do not leave as we came. Here, at the foot of this mountain, we became a nation, not by our strength, but by the law of God." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Many nodded, remembering the transformation they had witnessed and experienced. Moses raised the tablets of the commandments. "These words," he continued, "are not mere rules etched in stone. They are the path to life, to true freedom. Each commandment is a gift from God, revealing His character and His desire for us." He paused, letting the weight of these words sink into the hearts of the people. "Remember," Moses continued, "the first commandment, 'You shall have no other gods before me.' This is not a jealous God who wishes to deprive us of something good. It is a loving God who knows that only He can truly satisfy our souls." Moses saw understanding light up in many eyes, reminding them of the false promises of the idols they had left behind in Egypt. Continuing, Moses addressed each commandment, not merely reiterating the words but deepening their meaning. He spoke about how the commandment against murder was not just about the physical act, but about valuing every life as a precious creation of God. He explained how the prohibition of adultery was a call to faithfulness in all relationships, reflecting God's faithfulness to His people. When discussing the commandment not to steal, Moses highlighted how it went beyond mere material property. "When we respect what belongs to others," he taught, "we respect the work, time, and gifts God has given to each person. We build a society of trust and generosity." The people nodded, remembering how observing this commandment had brought peace and prosperity to the camp. Moses then addressed the commandment against bearing false witness. "Truth," he said, "is the foundation of all trust and justice. When we speak the truth, even when it is difficult, we honor God, who is truth itself." He saw determination in the eyes of the people, a renewed commitment to honesty in all their interactions. When he reached the final commandment, about not coveting, Moses emphasized its unique importance. "This commandment," he explained, "speaks to our hearts. It teaches us to find contentment in what God has given us, to celebrate the blessings of others rather than desiring them for ourselves." Many in the audience bowed their heads, recognizing their own struggles with envy and covetousness. As Moses concluded his speech, the sun reached its zenith in the sky. The light shone on the stone tablets as if illuminating God's very words. "Carry these commandments with you," Moses declared, his voice filled with emotion. "Not as a burden, but as a light for your paths. Teach them to your children. Meditate on them day and night, for in them you will find life, wisdom, and the constant presence of our God." A reverent silence fell over the assembly. Then, slowly, a voice began to sing a hymn of praise. Others joined in, and soon the entire camp was united in worship. Moses watched, his heart full of gratitude as the people embraced not just the words of the commandments, but their spirit. In the days that followed, the camp buzzed with preparations for departure. Moses oversaw everything, ensuring that the tablets of the commandments were carefully placed in the Ark of the Covenant. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he was confident that with the 10 Commandments as their guide, the people of Israel would find their way. On the morning of departure, as the camp was being dismantled, Moses climbed one last time to the top of Mount Sinai. From there, he looked out over the vast desert ahead and the promised land beyond. He reflected on the incredible journey they had made, not just physically but spiritually. The 10 Commandments had transformed a group of slaves into a nation, a people with a divine purpose. Descending the mountain, Moses joined the people. With the pillar of cloud guiding them, they took the first steps of their new journey. The tablets of the 10 Commandments went before them, a constant reminder of the covenant between God and his people. Moses knew that as long as they remained faithful to these principles, they would find not only the way to the promised land but to a life of purpose, justice, and communion with God.